students. We have supported over 20,000 students and graduates into employment. So something we are very proud of. We want to ensure that whatever support it is that you need to access a level playing field, you receive it. So as part of that, we want to make sure that you're aware of your privacy, of your choices, and any other legal protections under the Equality Act. So we are unapologetic in the drive for a level playing field. We also work with our next generation inclusive employer partners, and we help them to create more inclusive workplaces where everyone feels that they belong. And of course, we work with our next generation inclusive university partners, such as your universities, and this enables us to support disabled and neurodivergent students and graduates and the staff from those universities. So we are really pleased to have all of your universities as our next generation inclusive university partners. For us, this enables us to work very closely in partnership with your universities, to join forces with them to provide you with the support that you need to achieve the careers that you really deserve. And as part of that, we run these tailored sessions, such as this one, and it also means that you can benefit from the other initiatives and services that we provide. So, for example, we work very closely with our employer partners on our internships, our graduate programs, insight days that we run, and our scholarships. And although we're not a recruitment agency, we do offer some outstanding direct opportunities with these top employers, such as Google, Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Financial Conduct Authority, British Heart Foundation, and many others. We currently have some opportunities open at the moment with the British Heart Foundation. It's a range of graduate opportunities that you might be interested in. And these opportunities are across many different areas of the British Heart Foundation. So there are 3 opportunities within technology, software engineering, tech analyst, and a cybersecurity one. But if tech's not your thing, there's also a human resources program and 2 opportunities across their retail business. So they're really great opportunities. A few of them are closing on our website tomorrow. However, if you really like the look of the opportunity and you want a bit more time to complete the application, please just let us know via email and we can extend the deadline for you for a few days. So those opportunities are available to apply on our website. So like I say, if you're interested in any of those, please have a look, please apply. You know, we're here to support you and answer any questions. We also have one scholarship program open, that's with an Italian tech company called Bending Spoons. And that, again, is currently open. It's a tech opportunity for students studying computer science and similar degree subjects. And that's a scholarship that's provided for the next academic year. And we'll also be opening another scholarship with Google in beginning of March. So yeah, lots of opportunities for you to have a look at on there. And, you know, we're always adding to those programs throughout the year. So we also offer our individualized support program for you. That support takes on a number of different forms, depending on the type of support that you need. Our support is always very individualized, very personalized. It's always on a one-to-one basis, and it's based on your situation, your needs, and your concerns. We're always there at the other end of the phone. Probably the best way of contacting us is to email. Then we can arrange to have a call with you or a video appointment, whatever works best for you. But the thing to do first of all is to register with us. You need to do that via our website. And once you're registered, we have the relevant permissions to contact you, and then you can reach out to us to make that appointment. So we can also advocate on your behalf. We realize that, you know, you might be concerned about discrimination, you know, how it might be perceived when you're asking for adjustments, how it might be perceived if you need to tell an employer about a disability. So we're very aware of that, and we can advocate for you, including speaking to organisations who are not our partner clients and who might not always be aware of best practice. So for some of you, it might be that you are unsure of how to have a conversation about adjustments with an employer, or maybe you feel really anxious about it and you'd prefer to avoid the subject altogether and take your chances without the adjustments you need. And some of you may feel that you're opening yourselves up to discrimination if you do say that you need adjustments or you have a disability. And some of you may feel, and rightly so in our view, that applying for jobs could be one of the most stressful things you've had to do, and then talking about adjustments on top of that is adding unfair additional stress. So it all depends on you, on your experiences, how your disability impacts you, and the level of comfort you have when talking about adjustments. But whatever it is, we are here to support you and advise you as best we can. We want to take that stress away from you so that you can focus on answering application form questions, prepare for an interview or an assessment centre. So we want to take that stress away from you. And that's why we'll advocate for you and, you know, help you on that journey within the recruitment process. So skills enhancement. So we want to make sure that we empower and upskill you in every way possible. You might want some advice on how to write a good CV, some advice on how to answer those tricky competency questions. And we offer that tailored guidance to you on how to improve your chances of success. If you've got an interview coming up on our assessment centre, again, we can help you with all aspects of that. And if you'd like to help raise awareness amongst other students at your university, we would love to have you on board as one of our campus ambassadors. Mariella heads up that programme for us. So if you are interested or you'd like more information, then please contact Mariella and she can give you more information about that. And as I mentioned before, I'm just going to mention it again, but very importantly, we ask that you register with us, as this gives us the relevant permissions we need to help and support you. We will be giving you our website address at the end of the session. We will be giving you our website address at the end of the session. And like I said before, you know, registering with us gives us the relevant permission. Also gives you access to all of our services, the initiatives and the programs, events, opportunities that we're working on. So moving on to the start of our session, and, you know, we wanted to cover some topics that we know from talking to our students over the many years. We know there are different topics that you might be concerned about, that you might be worried about. So we want to have a talk about these and, you know, answer any questions you might have, as well as going through how we feel we can support you with these topics here. So it might be that you are worried about disclosing any personal sensitive information around adjustments, around disability. Sometimes this information is sought through an educational psychologist report or medical evidence. And what we can say to you here is that sharing that sort of information is unnecessary. You don't need to do that. And in fact, it is prohibited under Section 60 of the Equality Act, because the focus must always be on adjustments. And that's something that we will talk about in more detail as we go through. You might be worried about being discriminated against if you ask for adjustments. But what we can say is that reputable employers would not do that. Other concerns we know from talking to our students is that sometimes you might feel that imposter syndrome. You know, you might feel that you're not good enough. And we all experience this at times, but, you know, needing adjustments doesn't say anything about your competencies or how suitable you are for the role. So again, you know, we want you to focus on your achievements and just on asking for the adjustments. So yes, asking for adjustments. We appreciate that, you know, and all too often we hear from our students that you might be a bit scared to ask. You might be worried about how this will be perceived if you do ask for adjustments. You don't want to be a bother or a worry. and you might be concerned that this could be viewed negatively. You may also be worried that your application won't be considered in the same way as other applicants that don't need any adjustments. You might not be sure what you need to ask for. So the adjustments you're receiving in education, you might be thinking, how can that then translate into the workplace or into a recruitment process? You might feel unsure about what is reasonable, what you can and cannot ask for. You may also feel that there's a power imbalance, so you're not sure how to ask. You might be thinking, what happens if the employer doesn't give the adjustments that you've asked for? And finally, is the employer really inclusive? Will they be supportive to you, or are they just paying lip service? So first of all, looking at the employer's duty. So adjustments are about changing the way employment is structured. So the duty is always on the employer to reduce, remove, or prevent any obstacles if it is reasonable to do so. So if the absence of an adjustment puts a disabled employee at a disadvantage compared to non-disabled employees, and the employer must consider all aspects of the job, an adjustment needs must be assessed on an individual one-to-one basis rather than on the basis of the condition. And we have heard of situations where employers may say, these are the adjustments we provide for everyone with dyslexia. We just provide 25% extra time across the board. But we know that that's not the right approach, and it must be made on an individual basis because everybody's disability and condition impacts on them differently. So failure to make these adjustments is considered to be disability discrimination, and it could result in a claim. So the duty to provide adjustments applies only if an employer is aware or should be aware of a disability. So if you tell them, or if they suspect you might have a disability, which means you require adjustments, in which case they have a duty to investigate. So the employer has a duty to do everything they can to understand whether an employee needs adjustments and exactly what those adjustments are. So if you tell them you have a disability, they could ask you to speak to a specialist or provide medical evidence to be sure that you're getting the correct adjustments. But this is only referring to the workplace, so only once you've been made the offer of employment. So this is different from the recruitment process, as I was just saying before, during which they cannot ask any questions about health or disability. And once again, must be assessed on an individual's needs. So the employer is required to give you whatever you need, as long as it's reasonable, in which cases it will be. And there can't be a prescribed list or any limitations on this. So you will have most likely heard of the term reasonable adjustments. And reasonableness is an objective test to be decided on a case-by-case basis. So it's not merely what an organisation or the employee thinks is reasonable. And ultimately, it would be up to a tribunal to decide in case an agreement can't be reached. So what's reasonable for me, what's reasonable for you could be different. So at Employability, we prefer to say just adjustments. We don't use the term reasonable adjustments because it's obviously open to interpretation. So when we're talking about this, we just talk about adjustments in the recruitment process or in the workplace. But the most crucial thing here is that you must ask for what you need without worrying about whether or not it is reasonable. Most things will be reasonable. And if an employer doesn't think so, it can refuse to provide it, but the burden would then be on the employer to prove to a tribunal that they didn't act in a discriminatory way or risk having to prove that. So, and this is all relating to work. So an employer isn't required to provide anything that falls outside of the working environment or the recruitment process. So before we move on to the when, why, and how, I wanted to focus a little bit of time on the very important issue of what sort of questions an employer can ask you during the recruitment process. From our many years of working in the sector, we realised that lots of students have questions about this. Many get asked to provide information such as educational psychology reports or medical records. So I wanted to go through this with you, and hopefully it will be nice and clear going forward. So the general rule here is that employers are not allowed to ask you any health or disability related questions during the recruitment process. And this is set out in Section 60 of the Equality Act. It's stated very clearly in the legislation, so you can be confident and comfortable knowing that the law is on your side. It is your disability, and you don't have to talk about it if you don't want to. And even the act of asking you about the nature of your disability would mean that the employer was breaking the law in this respect. So the one exception to the Section 60 ban is asking you about adjustments. So an employer can, and they certainly should, ask you about what adjustments you need in the recruitment process. But to be clear, it can only be asking you about what adjustments you need in the recruitment process, and you only need to talk about adjustments in the process once you've asked for those. The employer can't ask you any follow-up questions about your disability. And in addition to that, they can't ask you what adjustments you would need to do the job until a job offer has been made. So if you tell an employer that you need adjustments, they shouldn't be asking you to prove that you need these by requesting medical evidence or asking you for your educational psychologist report. We do often hear of students and graduates being asked to provide these documents once they've asked for adjustment. Could you put yourself on mute, please? So yeah, we do often hear of employers asking for these records, but as Section 60 outlines, this is prohibited, and they should not be asking you to provide these sorts of documents. So it's not only a breach of Section 60, but also conflicts with GDPR. So an employer doesn't need to have sight of those documents in order to make you the adjustments during the recruitment process. You know, as some of you may have, your educational psychologist reports can be quite lengthy documents with lots of very personal information in there, which doesn't tell an employer anything they need to know about the adjustments that you need. And it really is a disproportionate amount of information to the requirement of making adjustments. So you don't have to provide that. Not all employers are aware that they can't ask to see the medical reports or educational psychologist reports, or even that they can't ask disability-related questions. So it's really worth thinking about how you would respond if you were asked such a question. And if you're not comfortable answering, it's worth preparing a response in advance, which states politely but clearly that you understand you don't have to provide this type of information, or you don't have to answer questions about your disability. But if you're particularly concerned about this, or if you found it wasn't well received, then please talk to us and we can help you and advise you, on what to do, on what to say, or it might be that you decide that isn't the best organisation for you. So moving on now to looking at categories of adjustments. So there are three sort of main categories for adjustments. So we have our physical adjustments, for example, adding a wheelchair ramp, providing accessible toilets, or making changes to somebody's workstation. So it could be adding a desk where you can stand and sit, or adding, equipment to the workspace, such as a footrest or a wrist rest, for example. And then your auxiliary aids. So this would be in the form of a support worker, could be specialist software, or an induction loop, something like that. And then provision, criteria, or practice. So this refers to the way things are done. And the really important point here is that this is extremely wide. So it can include providing a different format for application process. It could mean changing the format of the interview, or an element of an assessment centre. And it also includes not just the recruitment process, but the actual process of making the job offer, promotion, training, working conditions, and any other contractual arrangements. So I wanted to look at some of the support that is available. So some of the adjustments that typically come up in the recruitment process. So here's some specific examples that I'm going to go through with you, but this isn't an exhaustive list. You know, there is no such thing as an exhaustive list. An employer is required to make the adjustment or find the adjustment that you need. And it must also always, you know, bear in mind the way your disability impacts you and how you would be disadvantaged in a particular recruitment process. So there's the first one that I wanted to look at was adaptive screening. So it might be because of your disability that your profile doesn't quite meet the required conditions for the role. So perhaps it does look a bit different. For example, it might be that it has taken you longer to complete your degree. Perhaps, you know, due to disability, you had to take some time to recover and completed your degree in 4 or 5 years rather than 3 or 4. It could be that there's some inconsistency in your grades. For example, if you were diagnosed a bit later, perhaps the grades before your diagnosis and before you had some adjustments were not as they should have been, and then you saw those grades go up once you did get that support that you needed. It could be that there's a lack of work experience. You know, you were concentrating on your degree, and that meant you didn't have the bandwidth to then go and seek any work experience. So that could be another area. So what we do here is ask the employer to look at adapting their screening process. So it can be something that doesn't always seem obvious, but you know, it can work, and it's entirely valid to request this. It's important to do that at the very beginning of the process. So often you'll see on the application form, there'll be a space where you can add some information about extenuating circumstances, and that would be a good place to add that there, or perhaps in a cover letter. And we can help you write that statement if you're not sure of what to put there. But like I say, it's important to do that at the beginning of the process if you can, and just explain, you know, why your profile might look different, what the impact of the disability has been on you, on your grades, for example. So yeah, we can help you with that wording, and we can also reach out to the employer on your behalf if that was something you wanted help with. Hardware or software. So adjustments for this might be in the form of technology, which is specifically adapted to your needs. So it could be screen reading software, or use of auto captions, use of spelling or grammar check. So recently, one of the adjustments for one of our employers was to allow the candidate to complete their written exercise on a platform such as a Word doc, so they could use their spell check and then transfer that over to the virtual assessment centre that they were participating in. So that would be seen as an adjustment here. So you're actually able to use your software. Hardware could be having a larger monitor if you're attending an assessment centre in person, for example. And adapting interviews. So adjustments can be made to the length, the format, the timing, or even the location of an interview. So virtual interviews could take place in person if that was the preference. Again, you know, telephone interviews, the same situation. With pre-recorded interviews, again, you could ask to have a live video interview rather than the pre-recorded version, or potentially a telephone interview or face-to-face. For a virtual interview, it might be that you ask to have your camera switched off for some of all of the time, or you might need to conduct the interview via chat or with captions. So there's lots of different versions of adjustments that can happen with interviews. Other things could be having extra time, having the interview questions given to you in advance or given to you in a written format as well as an oral format, adding in rest breaks, letting the interviewer know that you're going to need them to repeat the question or ask for clarification. So there's lots of adaptations that can be made to the interviews there. And these sorts of adjustments can also be made to presentations and during the assessment centre as well. So support from an individual such as a support worker. So you can ask to have an individual with you during the recruitment process. That could be a sign language interpreter. It could be a guide if you are visually impaired or a note taker. Or it could be emotional support. So sometimes somebody with a neurodivergence or a mental health disability may want to have a support worker with them to support them in the recruitment process. And adapting their attitude. So adjustments can be made about asking an employer to change their preconceptions. An example of this could be around eye contact during an interview. So interviewers can often tend to use making eye contact to measure how engaged somebody is or how interested they are. Yet for certain individuals with a neurodivergence such as autism or a visual impairment, it can be very difficult to make and maintain eye contact. So failure to do that isn't showing a lack of interest, and it would be important for the interviewer to be aware of that and to take that into consideration. Similarly, with things like patterns of speech, some people with a neurodivergence might have, they might speak in a monotone voice, or they might find it difficult to show their enthusiasm in the interview situation. Or some people may have a tendency to interrupt. And changes to the physical environment. So this would be where you would asking for adjustments so that actual physical changes can be made to make the environment accessible. So there are just a few examples. As previously mentioned, the list is not exhaustive by any means. It's just to give you some examples. Maybe you have had experience of asking for those types of adjustments before. Maybe there were some there that you hadn't thought of. But, as always, please do talk to us if you're not sure about the adjustments, and we can certainly help you with that. It very much depends on how your disability impacts you specifically, and is also very dependent on what the recruitment process entails. So it's always very, very important to ask upfront what the recruitment process consists of, what activities they're going to want you to participate in. And that way you can have a clear idea or a clearer idea of what adjustments you might need going through. And does anybody have any questions before I move on to the next session? Next slide.
There's nothing in the chat at the moment, Sarah.
Okay, great, thank you. So looking at the why, when, and how of asking for adjustments and talking about disability. So we should always be thinking about the why, first of all. Why do I need or want to talk about disability and adjustments to an employer? So in other words, what would be the point of doing so? And the answer to this will determine when you have the conversation. So the why impacts the when. And then moving on to the how. So our mantra at Employability is to always ask for adjustments positively, confidently, and apologetically. So looking at the why you might want to talk about adjustments or disability in the recruitment process. So you might choose to talk about adjustments that you need in order to give yourself the greatest chance of success. So whether this is during the recruitment process or once you're in work, you should ask for what you need. Adjustments are there to level the playing field and to correct the disadvantage. So they're not a favor, they're there to help you, and they are your right. So in some cases, having a disability could be a qualification for the role itself. So there are some jobs that are part of a positive action schemes, which means that people with disabilities are actively encouraged to apply. So for example, you may have seen Disability Confident Scheme. That's where employers have signed up to meet certain criteria that means that they are disability inclusive. So there's certain levels and certain initiatives that they have to do in order to gain the disability confidence symbol. So you'll often see some public sector organisations will have that disability symbol. And also with those types of organisations, if you do say you have a disability and you apply under that scheme, then often what they would do is you will be able to, say, skip one of the first steps in the process. And as long as you meet the minimum criteria for the role, then you can skip that first process. But obviously, in order to be able to benefit from those schemes, you would need to say that you have a disability for those. And of course, applying to the roles via employability, again, that would mean you'd need to say you have a disability to register with us. And moving on to the recruitment process itself, you may wish to reference a disability as a way of showing that you have a particular skill or competency. So when employers ask you to provide evidence of, say, facing a difficult situation or showing resilience, they don't always necessarily expect you to provide something that is related to work or study, but you may feel comfortable talking about your disability in that situation because it's, very fitting for potentially for one of those competencies. And our advice is if you do want to do that, then, that's absolutely fine, but we would recommend only using the example once. So just for, one competency, don't use it constantly throughout the interview. And we always suggest that you keep it within the STAR technique. I'm sure you've all heard of that for interview practice, but it is referring to situation, task, action, result. So always keep that in mind when you're answering any interview questions. And, if you are going to use your disability, then keep it within that format as well. And you may wish to talk about disability in order to explain a difference in your profile. So as we had been talking about previously, it may be that your grades have been impacted. It may be that you were unable to get much work experience, or that your degree had to take longer than expected. So, by doing this, what you're asking of the employer is to provide an attitudinal adjustment. And you may want to talk about disability because you want to see how inclusive the employer actually is. They are interviewing you, but at the same time, you're trying to understand and trying to get a feel for if it's the right organization for you. So, by talking about your disability, that may help you make that decision and, see how disability inclusive they actually are. And finally, it may be something that's very important to you to talk about your disability. You may feel that it's part of who you are, and that it's important for you to be able to talk openly about it. And of course, that's absolutely fine. It is completely up to you, and it is absolutely your right to do so. So moving on to when you might want to talk about adjustments. So you may want to talk about adjustments at the initial application stage. Again, adjustments and disability at this stage. So you may, if you're explaining again about a profile difference, or if disability is a qualification for the role, or you're applying through a positive action scheme, all of those may make you think, actually, I am going to say that I have a disability. So explaining about a profile difference, making sure this isn't held against you, can itself be an adjustment. We know that that can be a difficult thing to write, so please do reach out and we can help you write a statement like that if you need that sort of support. During the recruitment process, so you should ask for the adjustments that you need at each and every stage in the recruitment process. You should ask for these before each stage comes up. You don't need to tell the employer about the adjustments you need up front. So let's say, there's a test, there's an interview, there's an assessment center. You don't need to say before, you even take the test, what you're going to need at the assessment center. It should be at each step in the process. So before the test, and then again, tell them what the adjustments are for the interview, and then again, tell them what the adjustments are for the assessment center. I have seen on application forms where it asks for adjustments for the entire process, but obviously a candidate isn't expected to know what the entire process looks like. So it's impossible to know what adjustments you're going to need. So it's very important to ask for those at each and every stage in that process just before. So it might be that you don't need any adjustments for the recruitment process, but you think you might need them to perform the job itself. So it might be that you decide to talk about disability after you've received an offer, and that may make sense to you, which is absolutely fine. You can do this, and if you choose to do that, you shouldn't feel guilty about doing so. You're under no obligation to tell an employer about a disability before starting work. So this issue is often relevant for hidden disabilities. And we hear of our students saying that they feel they might have been misleading an employer by not telling them about their disability before they get the offer of employment. But, this isn't right. It is your disability and it is your choice, and it's up to you when you choose to talk about it. And the same thing applies if you start work, and you might think you don't need any adjustments. But then it might be that after 2 weeks or a few months even, or even longer than that, you think, actually, I do actually need some adjustments, and I'm going to ask for them at that stage. So there's no time limit on this. It could be equally that you choose, not to speak to an employer about your disability at any point. It might be that you don't feel that you don't need any adjustments. Some people feel under pressure to be open about their disability. And yet disability covers a really wide range of things, and everyone's situation is unique to them. Everyone's disability is personal to them. So if you want to talk about your disability and feel it's important to you, then you certainly should do so. But equally, if you don't, you mustn't feel any under pressure that you should do so. You shouldn't feel that you're obliged to share this information. It is your choice. However, what I would say, and what is very important, is if you do need any adjustments, we recommend that you do ask for what you need, because if you don't, in effect, you're only discriminating against yourself, as you're putting yourself at a disadvantage compared to those who don't have a disability, and also compared to those who do and are receiving the adjustments that they need. So yes, do ask for what you need. And of course, this covers both the recruitment process and the workplace. And finally, how to talk about adjustments. So as I said before, our employability mantra is to ask for adjustments positively, confidently, and unapologetically. So if you think about examples of why you might want to talk about disability and adjustments, so during the recruitment process, if you need adjustments to assess an employer, to demonstrate a competency, in most cases, you can do that by talking about disability in general terms. You don't have to say what your disability is, just that you have one and that you need adjustments. But if you really can't do this, and if you find the idea of asking for adjustments extremely stressful or awkward, or if the employer has asked for information that you don't think they're allowed to do, such as the medical evidence or educational psychologist reports, then please register with us and reach out to us to ask for help in getting what you need.
I've got a question, or 2 questions, Sarah.
Yeah.
So the first one, as an autistic person who has worked in many companies and done many interviews, just wanted to say they wouldn't be able to request most of these things without feeling that it would have a negative impact on my opportunities, or even disclosing my disability because of negative experiences in the past. Any advice for this?
So, so the question is advice on how to ask for adjustments, or could you repeat the question? Sorry.
I think it's having a negative impact. They feel it would have a negative impact on them if they would ask for it.
Okay. Well, I think, it's obviously dependent on your personal situation, but I think it is important to ask for the adjustments that you need. If you're going into an interview and you're on the autistic spectrum and you haven't asked for adjustments, it could be a really challenging situation for you. If you're asked questions that are quite ambiguous or, very open-ended, it could be difficult for you to answer those. Or if, you're having difficulty making eye contact. So I think it sounds as though perhaps the employers aren't very inclusive that you've interviewed with, which is very sad actually, and a real shame. Because like I say, I think, you will need those adjustments. Otherwise it could be a really difficult and uncomfortable interview situation for you. So I think I'm really happy to give you some advice next time you have an interview, really happy to, help you with those adjustments. And like I've, said throughout the presentation, we're really happy to advocate on your behalf. And, we can talk to the employer ahead of you having an interview if you feel that you're at that stage where you really need that sort of support. If it's just, getting quite difficult for you.
And they've said they've added sort of how to ask and how to feel more confident. And they've just said thank you, and that'd be great to speak to you.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a good idea, because it is really hard, to know how to ask, to know what to ask for. And it just takes a bit of time to sort of feel that confidence that you're able to do that by yourself. So yeah, let's have a chat about that, and be really happy to help you.
Okay, someone else asked, my partner wasn't granted the possibility of working from home due to health issues. The reason given by his employer was that others would want that too. And what can be done in these cases? This is a very common reason to reject adjustments, even in schools, for using headphones, etc.
Yeah, I mean, using the reason that other people would want that too is not a valid reason to refuse an adjustment. If the company felt that the role could not in any way be completed by working at home, then they would have to go and do everything they could to prove that that was the case. But if the role could be done fully remotely and the disability impact was such that that was the adjustment that was needed, then, that should be able to be done by the employer. But like I say, the reason they've given doesn't sound like a valid one. So yeah, I mean, again, if you want to get some specific help with that situation, we can talk to you about that, off the call, off the meeting. Any other questions?
We have just had one. If you feel your employer misunderstands your disability after informing them of your neurodiversity, how should you go about bringing this issue?
So I think if it's misunderstanding in terms of adjustments, because what you want to do here is ensure that they are able to put those adjustments in place that you need. I mean, if you felt that, your manager wasn't understanding of that, then it could be a case for talking to somebody in human resources about it. If it's a company that has a human resources department, then definitely speak to them about that, because they should be the ones making sure that the adjustments are in place and that a manager has understanding of that. And if they don't, then they would need to have some sort of training to help them understand why somebody would need adjustments, you know, and help them to understand a neurodivergence that's specific to that individual on their team. Any others, Mariella?
I think that's all for now.
Okay, well, I hope that's helpful. I mean, you know, with things that are specific to you, then, you know, please do reach out and let us know. But yeah, you know, obviously some of those are quite specific to individuals, but, you know, they would be, you know, that would be the advice that I would give for those questions there. So moving on to after an offer has been made. So an employer at this stage can ask about your condition. So the situation changes completely from the recruitment process where they can't ask at that stage, but once the offer is made, they are able to ask about your condition. You don't have to respond if you don't want to. You know, you still don't have to tell them the name of your disability if you really didn't want to. But you may wish to in order to get the workplace adjustments that you need. And an employer, you know, can't withdraw the offer because of your disability. You know, doing so would be discriminatory. So I'm going to finish now by thinking about this question, because it is one that students really worry about. And, you know, it has come up, I think, in our session, and that is the question that we get asked many times, which is, will asking for adjustments during the recruitment process impact my chances of success? So, you know, we would love to say absolutely not. I guess that, you know, the truth is we can't say that for sure. You know, recruiters are humans and they come in all sorts, including as to those with attitudes about a range of things, including disability and their understanding of disability. Misconceptions, unfortunately, do still exist. But what I will and can say with confidence is that the vast majority of cases, vast majority of employers, you won't be discriminated against because you are asking for adjustments. And this is increasingly the case. Attitudes towards disability is certainly changing. And we're now seeing more and more employers who are actively seeking to recruit people with disabilities. You know, they want to create an inclusive environment within their companies. So in addition to this change in culture and attitudes, the law is on your side, and employers would be running a very serious risk should they let the fact that you've asked for adjustments influence their decision. And in reality, if you're not asking for the adjustments you need, it will impact your chance of success. So, you know, our message is ask for what you need, give yourself the best chance possible, and ensure that you have the level playing field that you deserve. And ultimately, in the unlikely event that this doesn't work for you, and you're not hired as a result of asking for the adjustments, then really, was the employer the right one for you? Would you really want to work at an organization with those values? I would say the answer would be no, particularly given all the genuinely disability inclusive employers that are out there. So please see our contact details here, register with us on our website. We can offer you that one-to-one support. Once you've registered, please do reach out, as it won't automatically contact us to let us know you've registered. So please send us an email, and then we can arrange to have a one-to-one appointment with you. And once you've registered, all our services will be available to you. It's completely free service for students and graduates, and you don't need a formal diagnosis. You know, we do appreciate there are some long waits for diagnosis at the moment, but if you feel you need some adjustment, some support, then you can get in touch with us. And for any questions, you know, there's our email address and our phone number. And then finally, Mariella will be adding the attendance and feedback form into the chat. So if anybody has any more questions, I think we've got a few minutes left for that.
What would your advice be to students who think they may have been discriminated against during the recruitment process?
I would talk to us about the specific situation. You know, unfortunately, it is very difficult to prove, I think, in a recruitment process. You know, again, I guess it really depends on the situation. You know, I guess if you've asked for adjustments and then not been invited, or an interview has been, you know, retracted, then that would be a clear sign. But it could be a clear sign, but it can be quite difficult in the recruitment process. But really happy to talk to you about that.
And then will all this information be sent out to people so we can review?
Mariella, the slides are usually sent, aren't they, to the universities?
Just the recording.
Yeah, so the slides and the recording, the recording, sorry, not the slides, but this session will be sent out to universities so that you can access that, you know, at any time. Well, thank you all so much for joining. If there are any other questions, you've got our email address, so please contact us. Please register with us. We really love to hear from you. But yeah, I hope that was helpful. And yeah, thanks ever so much.